All right, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that introduction. And yeah, hopefully this kind of exercise that we did is somewhat relevant and hopefully helps kind of start our conversation about or continue our conversation about probabilistic forecasting and how we improve our forecasters' skills, but really not their skills, more their confidence. So we'll talk about that as we go through this presentation. So as Randy said, my name is Joe Moore. I'm the warning coordination meteorologist at the office in Duluth. And then with me is Patrick. Patrick, I don't know if you want to say hello, but
Hello from my basement.
both from home. So all right, so let's talk about what we did here. So a little background about probabilistic training and our skill set of our forecasters. So last fiscal year, we had the Foundation in Probabilistic Forecasting, Data Distribution, and Statistical Measures course assigned, which was about 3 to 4 hours with a number of little vignettes introducing different types of probabilistic output, how to interpret that, how to better understand that. And then this fiscal year, we have assigned, it's about a 1-hour course, the Foundations in Probabilistic Forecasting Applications, which goes through a number of real-world examples. The first course from last year is kind of a good foundation course that introduces a lot of the kind of again, foundation, what these things are. And in this year's fiscal course, introduced a number of examples, but of course, because they're just examples, the data is kind of all canned. And while there are some multiple choice and fill in the blank questions with this, where a forecaster can kind of practice with this canned data, you're kind of just answering these questions in private. So that's absolutely a good way to train, but we know that there's other ways that people learn, and it's sometimes a little bit more fun to do something in real time where you really don't know what the answer is going to be. So we came up with this idea to do a forecast contest, and this is certainly not an original idea. And I'll talk about how I stole this from basically what I did in undergrad and some other ideas. But bottom line up front, the purpose of the exercise that we did here was to give our forecasters practice applying probabilistic forecasting training in a safe internal environment. It was to expose our forecasters to the wealth of available data from MBM and other data sets that we have available to us, and how to utilize that data when they're making a probabilistic forecast. For me, and this is the thing that I really kind of why I wanted to do this, I think our forecasters have these skills. They know how to make a probabilistic forecast, but maybe their confidence isn't exactly where it needs to be or where it could be. So they know that they could make a probabilistic forecast for pretty much any parameter. If a partner or public asks, what are the odds of a certain event happening? They're actually pretty good at doing it by analyzing the available data. This was an exercise to kind of show them that, actually you're really good at this. And also just the cost benefit of taking a risk in the forecast. So when you have to forecast something, especially when it's on kind of the edge of climatology, taking a risk, should you distribute your probabilities evenly across a number of bins, or in what situations do you kind of apply? We have a high confidence. If you apply that high confidence to your probabilistic forecast, how that works out, a little bit of risk reward, kind of just a fun little exercise of probabilistic forecasting using real world data. What the exercise was not, this was in no way trying to beat the MBM. MBM was a player in the contest, and I tried to form a lot of the questions that we asked and the bins that we created, and I'll show an example of that. But it wasn't trying to beat the MBM, but just reinforcing, but the human component of the forecast is important, but the purpose of the forecast wasn't to beat the MBM. And I think, Patrick, I think you could probably articulate this a little better than I could, but how we kind of, and MBM was there as an input and as a player, but we weren't trying to beat it.
Yeah, no, Joe, no, you're exactly right. I mean, the us versus them mentality, forecaster versus MBM, that doesn't work, right? That's not going to get us anywhere. That's, whether that's a small scale in our office or this contest and how we approach the day-to-day forecast to how we evolve in kind of this modernized forecast process. If we're kind of stuck in this us versus them trying to beat the NBM, we're going to just remain stuck, right? And so, it's really about, that human machine interaction. Each other brings something to the table, right? And we're playing off the strengths of both to arrive at a better answer. I mean, I can speak for myself and probably most of the other forecasters in that utilizing the contest. the NBM, especially the 4.1 and what we have for winter fields and wind fields and things like that, it's data. It was foundational to what I put in the contest, right? So again, this us versus them, that was not the point of the contest. The point is learning and especially not just the skills, because the skills are there, right? And Joe makes a great point of that, and he will later as well, but it's about confidence in flexing those skills, right? And the only way to do that is by practicing. So again, not an us versus them. That doesn't work in RWFO. That doesn't work in this contest. It doesn't work on a large scale for agency-wide problems. And so that's that upfront. That's just not the purpose of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And in the same vein, the forecast wasn't this exercise, this contest. It wasn't intended to cause any stress on our forecasters. We didn't want people being worried about this. It was completely voluntary. We offered this to forecasters, and we said, it's completely voluntary. I did give the option if people wanted to anonymously participate, just give them a number, and then I'll tell them what their number is, kind of thing. Nobody opted to do so because it was kind of just our own little local group. Just our local office that was doing this, so they weren't kind of worried about that. But I did give the option to forecasters. But this wasn't intended to make forecasters stress. It was just kind of a fun little exercise to practice. And finally, it wasn't about forecasting single values. It's not about Patrick forecasted 4.1 and I did 4.8 inches, and it was actually 4.7, and Patrick wins. And it's not about these precise deterministic values, because we know that. First of all, measuring snowfall doesn't work like that, because that's a subjective exercise in itself. But it's not about making these deterministic single value forecasts, but rather getting the forecast in the right bin. And I'll show examples of this when we go through the contest here. So additional background. Yeah.
Sorry, Joe, just real quick to follow up on that, getting into the right forecast bin, right? Say we're at a marine site. At 50 knots, 54 knots, it's really not a whole lot different. Like for a gust, right? It's windy, and it's kind of falling in the same headline bin, anyways. So it gets into just knowing when to stop digging, because you're getting down into the details that's going to have far diminishing returns. That at a certain point, I got myself into the right kind of bin in the forecast. And that's probably as good as I can do. And realizing when you're getting to that point and when to step away, right? These bins of solutions. Landing in the right, is it storm force? Is it gale force? Is it small craft for a marine example, right? And, getting into those right bins. And as we approach, we can hone it right. But at the same time, knowing when to stop, because you're not going to be able to do any better than getting into this one bin. And we preach that as well, just for severe thunderstorm warnings. Don't hem and haw over if it's a quarter or a half dot. It's kind of the same thing. It's not a baseball, right? So know when to stop and push ahead on the service aspect of it. So,
yep, absolutely. So to kind of summarize the background, how do we reinforce the concepts that have been taught in our training? How do we increase our forecasters' confidence in their ability to make an accurate probabilistic forecast? And how to make it actually a little bit of fun. And so, there's I am not an education person. I'm not even a training person. But people have different learning styles, and everybody learns using a combination of visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic exercises. So this is not an original concept. This has a name. I don't know what it's called, VARK. And so how do we kind of, our forecasters do some visual learning. They do some auditory learning when they go through modules. They do some reading and writing. They do a lot of reading when they go through these modules. But how do we give them a little bit more practice and a little bit of hands-on kind of, experience making a forecast, but in a safe environment where they're not doing it in real time? Obviously, our forecasters get to forecast every time they're working a shift. But not everybody gets to forecast for a big storm. And this was kind of a way to get everybody in the office a little bit involved when it comes to forecasting for one of our higher end storms, even if they happen to be on telework that week. So to get a little bit into kind of the nuts and bolts of the actual contest, so these are some screenshots of the contest spreadsheet that we made. There were 3 to 10 questions depending on the upcoming storm. Patrick and I would kind of collaborate on what questions we would ask. So we would use, snowfall at places where we had good known observers, like our office. Temperature, peak wind gust. In one case, we did, probability of thunder in anywhere in the CWA. So just a number of questions, and we use these bins. In most cases, I was able to make these equivalent to what MBM had available. In some cases, I kind of just made them up. So like temperature, we had some near record warmth that we ended up having in a day in December. And so we had forecasters guess, what is the max temperature going to be at the ASOS between these certain hours? And the bins were just 3-degree bins. So we're not asking, what's the precise high, but where do you think the probability lies? What are the odds that we're going to get a certain up to a certain temperature value? Same thing with the winds. The winds were nearly equivalent to what MBM does. It doesn't matter if it's 42 knots or 46 knots, really. Are we going to have gales? Are we going to have storm force winds, or somewhere in between? And so that's kind of how the questions were devised. Forecasters typically had anywhere between 12 and 24 hours to get a forecast in. We came up with these contests kind of on demand. Patrick and I would chat each other, and Patrick would say, hey, let's do a contest. And I'd say, oh, okay, I'll start working on a contest spreadsheet, and put together a number of questions. So we tried to get enough lead time where enough people were allowed to play. So we had enough people working on a telework shift or working on a shift to be able to get a forecast in. But obviously in these situations, our operational forecasters were also busy with the storm. So not everybody got to play in every contest. But we tried to give people the opportunity to play in contests and give them enough lead time to make a forecast. Again, all of the forecasts were these fixed bins. We did actual probability, so not cumulative. So when you look at MBM or our prob snow output, we're looking at, the odds for 1 inch or greater, the odds for 2 inches or greater, the odds for 4 inches or greater. Instead, for this, we actually forecasted precise probability bins, so 1 to 2 inches for snow or 2 to 4 inches for snow. It's a little bit different way to think about it. I like thinking about it this way versus the cumulative probabilities, but when we communicate our probabilities, we know that the cumulative ones, I think, are a little bit better understood, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on that. But in this case, for the contest, we didn't do cumulative. We just did actual probabilities for these bins. We used the Breyer scoring method, which obviously has a history in meteorology. I used it because I was familiar with it, and it's fairly straightforward in how it works. It obviously has advantages and disadvantages. I'm not a statistician, I'm a WCM, so this made sense to me. This is what we use. I'm sure there are some better ways that we could have done the scoring, and there's other ways we could analyze, but it wasn't about making a statistical analysis of each individual forecaster's accuracy. It was more just about, hey, how did you distribute the probabilities, and how did that work out? The specific logistics of how I did the Google Sheet, this is actually stolen almost 100% from how we did it in my undergrad advanced forecasting class, taught by Dr. Todd Zakor at Millersville. So this is actually what our advanced forecasting class was. We did probabilistic forecasting back in 2010 when I took the class. And so some credit to my former professor, Dr. Todd Zakor at Millersville, for kind of introducing me to this concept. And I also worked as a TA for a year doing the actual scoring calculations. So I had some experience compiling forecasts like this.
Yeah, and Joe, just to tag on to a few things there, we've been putting a big emphasis, especially on kind of these pre-briefing, pre-storm science slide decks, right? We're trying to package up and serve up some of this, emerging tools and data sets in a way that's easily consumable by ops who's getting 25 phone calls from everyone across the CWA from how much snow is going to fall at their house, right? So there's a lot of tugs and pulls in the office, and trying to showcase how to utilize some of these tools and data sets again for ops to make it a little bit easier on them, and that's been a team effort. And so this contest builds on that. How do we marry up foundational concepts with these emerging probabilities and probabilistic tools and techniques? And how do we do it so that for me, who's sitting at my basement, and someone else who's sitting in their kitchen or their living room and is not in front of GFE, to actually put some of this stuff into practice, right? And it's about reps. How do you build confidence? It's about engaging it and then doing it again and again and again and again, right? So that's really a big benefit here, is that it's not just the one person who's sitting in front of GFE, that it really allows us all to kind of flex our forecasting muscle, and also then just builds up each other for being resources during the storm, and giving opinions and things like that to help ops navigate what should be a team decision in all these things. And it's just kind of also, it's not sciencey, it's not servicey, but hey, it's kind of brings us together over something after 21 months of what or more as we're approaching of just being in the posture that we are. It kind of helps to break down a little bit of that too. And so that's a side benefit as well.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I kind of find a little bit of camaraderie in it, so I kind of liked it for that aspect. Another aspect too is that sometimes you get stuck in a week of telework during the big storm of the winter, and you don't get to have an experience actually analyzing the data, and you're kind of looking at it. You're looking at it from home kind of thing. But this allowed people to maybe dive into the data a little bit more than they would not have otherwise for a real world event where they had where they were interested in the outcome, even if they weren't sitting on the forecast desk that day. So the players we had our forecaster volunteers. The volunteers ranged from 4 to 8, depending on the staff availability and who wanted to participate. We also had consensus. So consensus was the average of all of our humans. And this is, again, a concept that I was reinforced and taught to me in my undergrad forecasting class. Consensus was just the average. So if I do a 10% forecast, Patrick does a 30% forecast, the consensus is 20%. How does that forecaster, how does the consensus forecaster perform? Overall, typically the consensus is the best, and that's kind of what we emphasized. That's really what you kind of should judge yourself against. And again, when possible, we use the MBM output as kind of a player. It didn't always have a direct equivalent output in the contest questions, so sometimes I had to do a little bit of fuzzy interpolation of the data, of the probabilistic data, and trying to match it to what the question was in the forecast contest. So definitely don't take away from this that what MBM's actual performance is, because MBM doesn't have a equivalent output for every single one of these forecast questions. So this is what the actual sheet looked like. This is one of my forecasts for one of the storms that we did. And so again, we kind of just had a couple of different elements. So what is the peak gust going to be at Duluth? The peak gust at Grand Marais? This is a marine site at Devil's Island. What is the peak gust going to be? Will there be lightning in the CWA? Will there be cloud to ground lightning? Precip, storm total snow, and then we had these temperatures because we had some record warmth coming in with the mid-December storm. And there's a lot of skepticism of MBM is going really warm with this. Is that going to happen? Well, yeah, turns out we did actually have some record warmth at some of our sites with these temperatures, with this storm. So it was kind of one of these situations where it was like, well, this is kind of at the extremes of climatology. Let's see how everyone was thinking how things were going to perform. We had a snowpack. Can we really hit 50? Can we hit above 50 with a snowpack? And yeah, we did. It was actually pretty interesting. So in this sheet, the boxes in red, those are the forecasts that people put in. So this is what people filled out on the sheet. And then afterwards, when I compiled all of the forecasts, I would put in the observation. So I would put in these ones, and then I had the sheet calculated to add up the summed difference squared, or the difference squared, and add up all the sum of those, and that's the kind of the Breyer score. So if you're interested in the technicalities of it, I can share it with you, talk about it afterwards. So this is what the forecast looked like. So in terms of, we did blank out people's names here in case you're wondering, so there would be names there. But this is how everybody performed. This is just kind of everybody's Breyer score, and then we had the average Breyer score for the entire contest. So in this case, our winner had a 0.512 Breyer score. The consensus was 0.625, so they beat the consensus. And again, in each contest, we reinforce that beating the consensus is kind of the goal. That's kind of your benchmark, since overall consensus is usually going to be the best forecaster. Breaking it down into one of these questions, one of the particular questions and how each person did their probabilities. This is just an example. So it allowed the forecasters to practice using all the probabilistic tools like MBM, like other tools that are out there, to make a forecaster and ultimately kind of take some risks. You take a calculated risk and you see how it worked out. Some people took risks and it ended up working out. In this case, Patrick and I both actually went pretty heavy on the 2 to 4 inch bin. because we thought that kind of all the guidance was going a little bit too high. We thought that for a number of reasons that the total snowfall for this event would be less. And so we leaned pretty heavily on the lower end. I went for a 2% chance of less than 1 inch. Probably was not a good way to distribute the odds, but I wanted to get there just in case that happened, in case the track of the storm was just a little bit off. In this case, it did not work out for Patrick and I going with those lower bins. We ended up getting 4.2 inches, so tricked over into this next 4 to 6 bin. And then for some of our forecasters, that worked out. This forecaster had an 80% chance of that bin, and they were rewarded with a very low Brier score. In this case, too, it was kind of interesting. I didn't notice this until I was putting together the slide deck, but NBM and the consensus were actually, even though the probabilities were a little bit differently distributed, the actual scores of both were equivalent. The consensus and the NBM actually performed equivalently in this case. So just interesting side note. So why did we do this again? It was to increase our forecasters' confidence. If they get a question from a partner or the public, they get a question on Facebook, well, what are the odds that we're going to do X? Whether X is a snowfall amount, whether it's a temperature, maybe it's something that NBM doesn't have right now. Like, what are the odds that we have a below 20% relative humidity this afternoon? Giving our forecasters confidence that they can look at the data, and even if NBM doesn't have that exact output available, that using the skills that they have to look at all the data available, they can make a probabilistic forecast, and they're usually going to be pretty darn good at it. So we think our forecasters have these skills. It's just increasing our confidence to make these kind of probabilistic forecasts. I also, this is a big pet peeve of mine, I hate when people say that, well, we don't know what's going to happen. It could be 1 to 12 inches. Well, no. We know a lot more than that, actually. And so, we are going to know in situations, there are some forecast situations where a foot of snow, maybe there's a 10, 15% chance of that. There are other situations where a foot of snow is absolutely out of the question, but it could be 2 inches or 6 inches. And here's where the odds lie. And knowing that, look at the raw data, make your forecast, look at the distribution, and we can say things more intelligent than, well, 1 to 12 inches, I don't know, it's going to be somewhere in there. We can say something utilizing the probabilistic data, especially in the 2 to 3 day time frame, to say, listen, there's the most likely odds is 4 to 6 inches, but there's a 20% chance that we could have more than 6 inches with this forecast, but probably not a foot, but maybe a little bit more than 6 inches. That kind of information can be valuable to glean out when we're especially in a situation where we know we can't make a good deterministic forecast. Another secondary motivation, again, was to kind of provide a safe internal environment for people to make a risky forecast, make a forecast that's a little aggressive than we might otherwise do, and learn from your mistakes and successes, and ultimately just have some fun. We think that the learning of everything should be fun and engaging. People should want to do this. This is awesome that we get to do this. I mean, we have the coolest jobs on the planet, in my opinion. And so our training should be fun. Like, doing these exercises should be a lot of fun. We should like doing the training. And so this is kind of an exercise where, I kind of think of an example from The Wire where it's like, when students are learning, they don't even know that they're learning because they're having so much fun. In this case, it was an exercise where people were learning what they were learning more, increasing the confidence, but they probably didn't see it as a training exercise. They kind of saw it as what it was. It was a little contest, a little friendly contest between each other. So in the end, kind of forecasters seem to enjoy the contest, especially in our limited staffing posture. Like Patrick said, I think it was a kind of a fun way for us to connect with each other across telework and the different shifts that we have. Forecasters also are getting more familiar with the NBM 4.1 distribution, and I think, in my opinion, I think this is helping to increase our trust in NBM. To see the actual output in different events is going to say, is giving them the trust to say, oh, you know what, NBM actually does a pretty good job distributing this particular element probability. So I can have a little bit more trust in NBM. So it's just getting them familiar with the output, knowing what output is available is a big part. Understanding the tools that you have in front of you, because we have so many tools nowadays. And Patrick, I don't know if you want to kind of reinforce this, that it was not trying to beat the NBM.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I don't know, it simply wasn't, right? Because that is a mentality that, again, doesn't work on the ops floor. It doesn't work in this contest. It doesn't work in larger evolve initiatives that we're trying to do, right? So we're moving forward together. as a human, and as these data sets emerge, right? And we each have strengths that we bring to the table, right? So, and it's building confidence in how we move forward in that. And we don't necessarily have all the answers and of how all this, will go nuts and bolts wise, or how we continue to, use this in the best way. But we got to build our confidence that we can do this, right? And we have the skills. I thought that was excellent by Joe. Especially in some of the new hires that have come on, it's it's like, what you're doing. I mean, you graduated with a difficult degree. You know what you're doing. Yeah, I think it's really, we too often say skill, but it's really the confidence. So I think this really helps to bolster that confidence. Again, it's not trying to beat the NBM, because that's not the point of this, right? The NBM is a foundational component to what we do and helps us to get to answers faster than we could on our own, right? And it's growing just as we're growing in this. And so we're really trying to push this, we're moving forward together in it. The beating the NBM, us versus them, it doesn't work at any level, right? And that's just not what we're going for. So again, I thought Joe made a good point that it's, our forecasters are getting more familiar with 4.1, where a lot of that data went into this and it goes into our pre-science briefings, and just getting them to engage with it more, right? And that's going to help the developers. You got more eyes on it, can be a lot more input, the positive and constructive of what's working well and what's not, because boy, there's a lot of corners to our country, right, and those developers are trying to make this work for it all, and just more eyes on it, the better there. So I appreciate that, Joe.
Yeah, and at worst, at least better articulate the feedback that we're giving. Not to say, oh, NBM blew it on this. To actually look at the distribution, say, what, NBM was a little top heavy on this. I wonder why that was, and ask those kind of smarter questions and better feedback, so that we can better inform the developers of, hey, maybe we could adjust something here, or what happened here, what really break down where how the NBM distribution came out, how that was weighted, kind of thing. It's a learning experience. We've done about 3 of these so far, and we're going to aim to do like 1 to 2 a month as the weather permits. Like, we haven't done one for extreme cold, but we certainly could do that if we have a cold snap kind of thing. We could do this for other elements too, but yeah, just kind of fun little exercises. Some future work, some future ideas. This was completely non-scientific. I didn't do like a pre and post assessment. I guess if we wanted to make this a little bit more formal of an exercise, we could do something like that, where we gave an assessment before and after to say, where do you think your probabilistic forecast experience is, and how familiar do you feel like with NBM's output, that sort of thing. But at this point, we're not doing anything like that. I also think, kind of as a follow on, or maybe as something more advanced, I think it'd be cool to use this concept to aid in real-time forecasting. So maybe just like in, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you have, ask the audience. It would be kind of cool, if we have, 6, 7 of us on telework on a shift, and we've got a big event coming, it'd be kind of cool to do one of these in real time, and say, hey, quickly, everybody take a look at this. What do you guys think the distribution is going to be for a couple of our forecast points? Let everybody look at the data, make a forecast, and then do a little Google Meet and talk about it, and kind of quickly see the distribution of how everybody is thinking. So not something that we're doing. We've always done these kind of, the output is available, but I don't share the output usually until when the snow has already started flying, kind of thing. But it's something we could explore if that might be useful to aid our forecasters and kind of better utilize our workforce. And finally, we could do some additional training on relevant super forecasting techniques. I was kind of inspired by the Southern Region Science Circles to read the book Super Forecasting. Patrick had already read it beforehand, but we could, if we wanted to, maybe go a little bit deeper in some of the concepts discussed in this book, because there are a number of concepts in there of putting together your forecast, how to analyze data that are relevant to what we do. And so it might be interesting to apply some of that training. Patrick, I don't know if you wanted to add anything more about that.
Yeah, no, not really, right? And so
yeah.
It's kind of, what were they doing? Oh, they were doing this. They probably didn't know it, which is, hey, not a bad thing, right? But there's been I think of Dr. John Gravel and Dr. Jeglum and Tommy Grafenauer at Grand Forks. I mean, kind of this talk of getting to this super forecasting um, mentality, right? And it's not this huge giant change that we have to do. It's just small different ways of thinking about things, and we probably unconsciously employ them to some degree, right? And so there's even been talk of, hey man, should every new hire just, your assignment is you got to read this book, and it should be like maybe an entry level NWS textbook or something along those lines, right? But yeah, these kind of the whole point of this is to just change the way we think a little bit, right? Just tweak a few things in how we are approaching these this modern forecast process, which again, it's kind of the same thing that we've been doing, marrying up foundational things with emerging data sets. That's what's always just been done, but it's just being a little bit more intentional about it, right? And helping that to inform our decisions as we move forward.
Yeah, and I don't think like super forecasting is not a Bible. It's not a, everybody must read it and follow. But there's a lot of great just tips in there of how you approach a forecast. Having counter, just how you collaborate with each other, how to do that smart in a way that's kind of intelligent and is productive. So there's a lot of great ideas in it that I think that we could better utilize and kind of share with our staff. So that's all I've got. So we can open it up to questions.
Thanks, Joe and Patrick. Fascinating discussion and presentation. I just a couple quick comments, and then there's some questions I want to get to. One thing that I love that you talked about right up front is doing something where you don't know the answer. I think that's very powerful, as opposed to doing something after the answer is known. So I think there's so much value in having these kind of discussions when nobody knows the answer. And the other point was the ability to practice, right, and get at bats is so important. And this is a neat way to kind of increase the at-bats. I have some questions, but at first I want to open up the floor. And speaking of Southern Region Science Circles, Chad Gravel has some comments and I think a question. So Chad, go ahead.
Uh-oh. Hey everyone. Boy, this is what you guys have done here is really great. Like you said it at the end, but like I just kept thinking like this is exactly what they did in super forecasting, right? Like, they give their participants questions, and then they tell what is the probability, and they forecast probabilities on the occurrence. And you can completely do that, and you guys have really done that, with your staff, and it's fantastic, completely. I have a ton of thoughts going through my head. I can tell that you guys are pretty sensitive about, the competition with the NBM. And, I don't know your office super well. I just know a few of your Mets up there. And it may not have been like that, but if I was gonna like outsource this idea to like Southern Region SUs to do with their WFOs, I would highly encourage them not even to like put like after the fact talk about like maybe qualitatively how the NBM did, but not even putting them up as like scoring. And I can tell you guys are pretty sensitive about it, which is good. You mentioned a few times. I just know that wouldn't fly everywhere. I don't even want to go there. Again, that's my opinion. You guys can. I don't think we need to comment on it, anymore. Just because you guys did it a lot, but I just wanted you to know that it just may not fly, everywhere.
No,
go ahead. I try to get to
and that's the thing. We've been, we're proponents of it, but we're honest about it. In what the NBM does and where it is in its development. It's and so it's foundational in its place, right? And so our office may be in a spot where putting the NBM as a player in this contest, is people know what that means, that it's not going to be us versus them, right? But is that that may not be always as transferable. So I understand that. I think our forecasters embrace the NBM, using it as a powerful tool and aware that it's only going to get better. And
Yeah,
the only way it gets
definitely.
better is if they can play a role in helping to inform that too.
So what do you, I mean, my other question, I guess, and I might have other ones down the road based on like the discussion that goes on, but one of them is, what do you think, like, do you think they're more confident after doing this a few times with like providing social media graphics and things like that, probabilistic, basically approaches to those? Do you think that because of this exercise that they're a little more confident in doing that? Just because they understand how to, maybe they're learning how to think probabilistically now, or do you think that you guys had already done that? I know that there's a few offices in Central Region that are really, really great, and I think, Joe, you guys are one of them that that just you have a lot of confidence in putting probabilities, on those social media graphics and things like that. So what are your thoughts about that, about this exercise and then giving them confidence to think probabilistically?
Yeah, I feel like this exercise is definitely, it's not like we're going to increase competency from like 60 to 80%. I think this is definitely like a very marginal, benefit. I don't think that like going through 10 of these contests is going to make a forecaster incredibly better, but I think what it does, I think, is maybe make the forecasters, like you said, we are already posting a lot of probabilistic output, and using that concept, using a lot of the best practices that have been developed across other offices at Central Region, and applying them here. In that day 2 and 3 time frame, showing the odds of 4 inches of snow instead of going with a very large range or nothing at all. And maybe what this contest does, I think, is allows our forecasters to feel a little bit more confident in that data, and maybe can better articulate it when they're doing a phone call or a weather briefing or answering a question on social media or from a partner, to better articulate kind of how the odds work out. So it's great to have the training, but when you have a lot of experience with it, your competency improves, and you can maybe discuss what the probabilities mean a little bit better to those who don't work in probabilistic data often, which is going to be most of our partners in the public. So I guess that's how I would describe it. It allows our forecasters to get a few more reps with the probabilistic mindset, and maybe better clearly communicate that to our partners in the public when we're making those graphics, and especially when it
Yeah,
comes to like responding to questions.
right.
Yeah,
Okay, I got one more question. Sorry, Randy. So I hate forecast contests. I'm going to tell you all that. Like, some people that know me, they just know that like I hate them all, okay? But I don't hate this one. And I need to give, I've always heard great things about Millersville. I don't know many of the professors. I know Seppi, from being at SLU and meeting her through there. But man, I'm telling you that you guys doing that are light years ahead of everybody, even 10 years ago. And I wish that, especially like the college, I think Penn State run, or maybe OU runs it now, that forecast contest that everybody does. I forget what it's called. I did it, in
Yeah,
undergrad.
weather challenge.
Right. If that was like this, oh man, I would support it 1,000%, because because you're teaching in early on, right? Like like, I'm going after my dream job, right? I'm a meteorology major, and semester 1, you're just teaching them how to think deterministically in that weather challenge. And if they did this, man, we would be just so farther down the road. So I just got to commend, you guys in Millersville, and that was my last comment. And I'll give it back to Randy. But it's, yeah, light years ahead of at least from what I know from most people.
Well, thank you for that. I'll pass on the compliments. Yeah, I think we were both very sensitive to calling it a contest, because I think that has very negative connotations immediately, because we don't want people to think that, oh, I'm better than you. because we're working as a collaborative team here. There are no winners and losers. I mean, we all want to produce the best output possible in every situation, whether it's warning ops, whether it's a winter storm. And so, if there were sensitivities, I think this contest certainly works. If you did force everybody to be anonymous and you were forecaster 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and or you did it privately and you couldn't see everybody else's forecast, I think there's still some value in doing this exercise. Especially like Bruce said, I really love doing it in real time because nobody knows the answer. That's what's fun. Like, I mean, something could change at the last minute and you could be completely wrong. And having a lot of those failures, I think, is what builds a really good forecaster. And so it's, again, more at bats, as Bruce said.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's part of it there, Joe. One thing that came to my head is that I think it kind of built the culture that we built up here, right? Of being able to do, everyone's comfortable putting their names out there, and they can see that, yeah, just because I have a suit position, right? Boy, I really flubbed it up in a few spots, right? And that's okay, and so it kind of, especially the Irish can see that, like, yeah, you didn't get that right either. Like, yeah, no, I didn't. So it's, again, learning by, from mistakes, learning from, from others and how they distributed the probabilities and things like that, and seeing what's the cost and benefit of that, right? And then how does that transfer over into the forecast of taking a risk in the forecast instead of just trying to avert, risk itself. So, yeah, that was just something that came up in my mind.
Great discussion. Really appreciate the comments and the questions there, Chad, and appreciate the responses, Joe and Patrick. We have Bruce Smith wanted to ask a question as well. So Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Probably more comments as opposed to questions, but I think they'll be very supplemental to what Chad said in some ways. I think this is a great effort. I love the presentation. My takeaways, Joe and Patrick, were the benefits of talking probabilistically and getting that communication going amongst your staff. And you emphasize that point real well, just to get us thinking more probabilistically. At the end of the day, it's a very nuanced discussion about what we're really trying to accomplish here. And kind of what I summarized, and I think you got to this near the end especially, was really increasing forecaster confidence, and more specifically in how to think probabilistically and coexist with the NBM. That's kind of how I pulled away from your talk, while at the same time, and Chad made this point, is really resisting the temptation to make this a beat the NBM game. And that's a slippery slope, and it's a direction people could go very easily if you're not really aware of that possibility. And that sort of dovetails though into one final question or point I'd make here. And Patrick, I think you said this a couple of times, is how can this serve to inform changes in the NBM? And I think that is really a grand challenge here, because the NBM is evolutionary. It's going to continue to improve. Is it 100% reliable and calibrated? Well, we're working toward that ultimate goal. But creating the mechanism at the regional level to infuse feedback to help improve the NBM is really our grand challenge going forward. And as far as how Duluth would inform that from this, we got to have robustness in our findings. So we got to resist the temptation also of having a couple of cases where you think you picked up on some tendency of the NBM. Now you want to inform changes in the NBM. We really need to approach that from a very robust, comprehensive, in a robust, comprehensive way, so that we're seeing true systematic tendencies rather than cherry picking one or two cases and seeing that we've picked up a tendency. So those are just a few red flags I'd be aware of as you continue this really cool initiative. So kudos to both of you for leading that discussion within your office.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bruce. And that's the case too, that we try to talk about with the NBM. That, I mean, it's as in anything, it's not. It is foundational. What do we do? And probably a lot of people used it to inform most of their decisions in this, and operationally, even V4.1. And then, okay, layer on a little bit of your own foundational conceptual knowledge, and that's how it should be. And I think another thing that comes to my mind is, not just, hey, throw this contest out at folks. I mean, we've really been talking about this stuff for a couple of years now in our office, really putting a focus on, trying to talk about and put examples and briefing slide decks, internal briefing slide decks of how we employing this information, right? So, to kind of set our forecasters up for, this is just a little bit more ingrained. They're so much more used to looking at it and like, wow, that forecaster's busting out a prob max wind gust from the NBM v4.1 on their own. That's awesome. Great. It takes an effort to get there, right? And so there's a lot that went into, it's not just here, plop, here's a forecast contest or exercise or whatever you want to call it, that, on the front end, it takes the commitment to giving them, the confidence in what they're seeing, making them aware of what's out there, and, that we do it again and again and again and again. And it just becomes a more second nature to them. And then, and then it's all about filtering feedback up the right way, right? That if we see something, if we talk about it, in sub-regional seed communities, and we filter it up, that feedback up the right way, right? And so that's very important too.
Excellent.
I think
Thanks for the... Go ahead.
I think part of it, just to add on to what Bruce said, it's not only like just input into feedback into NBM's actual output, but also just the visualization of that. Like, it'd be really helpful on the What's Up viewer if we could do this or that, or wouldn't it be cool if we could understand what the distribution looks like this, or how the trend looks like this. So as we kind of think probabilistically, having output that can better inform us and answer the questions that our forecasters have. So.
Excellent. Thanks for the comments. We had one that came in from Danbaumgart that I wanted to share. He said, I hear what Chad is saying on the inclusion of the NBM. This seems like a good method to evaluate NBM skill since we are initializing the forecast with it. Maybe it does come down to each office's culture, but in the big picture, including NBM should build confidence in it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think we've seen that, right? I mean, it's foundational to just what we do every day, right? It's the foundation of our forecast, large sections of it. And exactly to, that it's still new, right? It hasn't been around that long. So continuing to, marry up the forecaster machine, whatever that NBM or whatever NWP you want to put in there, right? And so, yeah, that, it is a great foundational data set that gets us a lot of answers. There are some things that it continues to need to grow on. We all need to, right? So, and that, hey, there's still foundational components to this that, still have a place, right? That, the NBM may be able to get us 90% of the answers. And that means that, boy, we have a lot more time to spend on the other 10% than we would have. But, that, hey, this is, I think it goes to show that, the NBM, there's a lot of work going into making it calibrated, reliable, and that's what we desire, so that we can get out of maybe some grid manipulation and get into something that's where we can really put a significant value add and really invest our time. Right? We're still going to have to do that to some grids and some time ranges, sure. But exactly, it helps to build our confidence in probabilities, and then helps to demonstrate the power of the NBM, right? Or which is really just the power of utilizing what computers do best, and whatever you call that, NBM or whatever. That it's not just us who are dealing with this in the weather service, but pick your industry, right? This human machine interaction, not that much different, and so we're just trying to continue to navigate that the best we can.
And to the point of is this a good way to evaluate NBM? Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about cherry picking. We're literally just cherry picking one event, a handful of events at a handful of very small sites. And NBM is forecasting for a large domain over many time ranges. We're also looking at big storms. We're not doing this for the daily forecast, where actually NBM is darn near as good as the state of the science can perform. We're looking at extremes. We're looking at the extreme forecast, and so it's hard to say just from one contest or from a handful of contests, NBM's too hot. It's too hot. It does way too high in certain situations. But it does at least give our forecasters one way to preliminarily evaluate the data. and maybe dig in further. Maybe they say, oh, you know what, it looks like NBM's hot a little in these situations. They could investigate it further and say, oh, you know what, actually, it's if it is a systematic thing or if it was a one-off issue. So
one thing that just came to my mind there, Joe, is that also helps the forecasters evaluate themselves, right? You got to observe yourself to be able to change, and so it's just as much as, you know, it's how calibrated am I, you know, as a forecast. Man, I've done 3-4 of these, and maybe I'm always ending up on the same side of the distributions, and it's not working out too well. Well, maybe I need to recalibrate myself too. So I think that's an added benefit too, that, you know, it's really, you know, also an exercise in observing ourselves and our tendencies, and maybe I need to recalibrate myself a little bit, and how I'm taking in all this data, how I'm using it, and what's my final output, right? You know, so I think that's just something that came to my mind, is that it helps the forecasters observe themselves. I mean, it's, again, small sample sets and, you know, high-end events, and maybe you were just, you know, didn't have a lot of time to look at stuff. But, you know, if there's this pattern of, I'm consistently way overdoing the probabilities in this type of scenario, boy, something I didn't realize I was doing, and that's something that, you know, I can work on going forward.
yeah, no, I love that. And we did not give anybody any tips going ahead. I did show them how the scoring would work and how Breyer is calculated, but I didn't give them tips like, you know, maybe you're going to want to, you know, go across at least 4 bins or something like that, or, you know, don't go above this percentage. We didn't give anybody guidance going into this. We kind of just let them at it, because they do this every day. They're making probabilistic forecasts. So it was kind of cool to just see how people learn and make mistakes. And, you know, should I have really put a 2% chance in for this one example? Like, nah, I probably should have just assigned that probability to this bin. Or, you know, based on the guidance, I probably should have put a little bit more into this bin too. So it's kind of just learning and, yeah, calibrating yourself.
Hey, Joe, this is Chad. I have a follow-up to those comments in this slide. Is that you know, as you were talking, I was going through this slide, and I was pretty fascinated by it, because everybody is, you know, well, for the most part, there's an exception. It's JJM. I'm going to get there. That they were doing the probabilities in increments of 10 for the most part. And in the super forecasting book, they talk about how those people that just forecast in 10s actually had worse scores than people that were more granular, like your 13 and your 2% and your 78. So maybe, you know, just maybe, like maybe give them that tip, right? And show them that it's behind science. And then for the next couple of rounds, and see what happens, right? Like, I think that would be a really interesting test. And you know, wondering what your comments are about that.
No, I think that's a great thing. And like, even just, you know, it's the thinking fast and slow thing. I forget, it's got a name for it. Well, basically when you come back and reevaluate it from the counter side, and, you know, like, if you had to move that 10% up or down, which way would you go? And then why aren't you adjusting the probability that way? Or, you know, are you really 80%? Yeah, just evaluating your probabilities, taking kind of a second look at things, and ways to kind of better build a probabilistic forecast from ways that we know that you can improve it, even without better input data. So yeah, no, I really like that, Chad. And I think it would be cool to kind of do a couple little kind of casual meets with our staff and kind of explain some of the topics.
Yeah, great discussion. Great observation, Chad. And Dan, going back to your comment, Chad said he agrees with your comment regarding the NBM. I had one follow. If you have a question, please type it in the question pane or raise your hand and I can unmute you. I had just kind of one follow-up, guys. I love that this requires forecasters to think probabilistically. Like, right, that's one of our big challenges in moving forward with probabilistic forecasting is that thinking, that thought process, that thinking process. And I love it that it requires them to really look at the NBM and understand what the NBM distribution looks like. One thing I wonder about is they're creating their own probabilistic distribution, right? And as the NBM evolves and becomes this really well-calibrated probabilistic output, you know, we can't touch that, right? We don't touch the probabilistic distribution. It's our job to interpret it and communicate it, right, effectively. So any thoughts on that, if there's, you know, because we can't do that. We can't be going in and manipulating that distribution. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, Yeah, I think that's a big challenge. We've talked about that, in test beds over the years of, adjusting probabilities. How do we do it? Should we do it? And things like that. I think part of it is it's not just, should I go in and adjust my pot snow to 90 or something like that, right? That's not necessarily what this is all about either. It's, I should be thinking as I'm going through the forecast process of what are my probabilities of landing in these different spots, right? And that, well, then I'm going to talk about that, right? And it may not be, the end of that may not be editing some probability grid, right? It's based on where I'm going to land potentially across these bins, or where the probabilities are falling out. Maybe I should, go down this road for messaging, or maybe I'm really not. I shouldn't go with the blizzard warning if I'm kind of down these lower bins of probability. So, I think that's something that we are going to meet up with more and more is, kind of the nuts and bolts of probabilities and whether we should or how should we touch them or not. But I think more importantly, it gets beyond that of, knowing where the problem, how we're distributed, which means how I should fall on, maybe I should try this map instead of that type of map, or maybe, I should, it lends itself to kind of this more message selection, or it even gets to, do I have enough people in the office for this event or not? Am I thinking about kind of those other scenarios, which could even inform staffing? So it just touches so many more things than just, I think, editing probabilities, which I think we want to stay away from, right? And we still are trying to work our way through with the best ways to do that, or if we should be doing that. And that's kind of a discussion for another time. But I think it more so touches on everything else of having an understanding of kind of where things are falling out on the spectrum of possibilities, and that informs everything. It informs messaging, that informs staffing, that informs headline selection, and just helps to get us through the process a lot faster, knowing that, what, I can dig and dig and dig through data for 2 more hours. Not going to get me any further than the answer I have right now, and that's important too.
I almost kind of make it equivalent of you in your undergrad class, most of us had to do plotting array of manually from the raw data. And do any of us do that now? No. Is there any value in doing that? No. But doing it manually kind of gives you a little appreciation for the thermodynamic diagram and how to read it and understand it and see different things in it. I would say just like building a probabilistic forecast is the same kind of thing. Do we actually build the probabilities in real time in most of our applications of providing decision support services? No. No, we don't build these things manually. Maybe once or twice though for event-based DSS, we're still going to have situations where we have to come up with some kind of odds for hitting a threshold and that sort of thing. But in a lot of cases, no, we're going to be utilizing the MBM. But by making the forecast manually, by going through the motions, kind of seeing how the probabilistic forecasts are made and making your own, you're getting a little bit of practice and understanding the process a little better. So.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, Joe. Appreciate that. And Patrick, I think you really touched on some great points there as well, as far as kind of understanding the range of potential outcomes and thinking about how that impacts your messaging and your staffing profile and that sort of thing. So great comments.